On October 14, 2023, at 6:47 in the morning, Devon Archer, a 39-year-old technical diver with TDI Trimix Advanced Certification and 890 logged dives, was conducting a mineral survey 187 nautical miles southwest of Guam when his body camera captured something that, according to every established principle of marine biology, should not exist. At 1,197 feet below the surface, in the southwestern region of the Mariana Trench, operating at depths where nitrogen narcosis typically renders complex thought impossible, Devon maintained absolute mental clarity for 23 consecutive minutes while observing a biological organism measuring 47 meters in length with bioluminescent properties that violated known taxonomic classifications. His ascent, which followed proper decompression protocols and lasted 4 hours and 18 minutes, was documented. His footage was authentic. His equipment functioned perfectly. But here's what makes no sense. The U.S. Navy Deep Submergence Unit arrived at his position 2 hours and 40 minutes after he surfaced, traveling from Pearl Harbor in less than a third of the time such a journey should require. Devon never transmitted his discovery on any frequency. His communication system had failed at 6:52 that morning. So how did the Navy know? And what the classified documents recovered 3 months later revealed wasn't a new discovery. The Navy had been tracking this creature for 56 years. Devon Archer wasn't the type of person who panicked underwater. He'd earned his credentials through 2 decades of methodical work, starting with his service as a Navy diver from 2006 to 2014, where he'd participated in submarine recovery operations and deep salvage missions that required the kind of precision most people couldn't sustain at 50 feet, much less at depths where the pressure could crush a human skull in seconds. After leaving the Navy, he'd transitioned into commercial technical diving, specializing in deep-sea mineral surveys for companies operating beyond recreational limits. His reputation in the technical diving community was built on skepticism and accuracy. He didn't chase theories or entertain speculation. He documented what existed, measured what could be measured, and reported findings that could withstand scrutiny. His colleagues knew him as someone who'd rather abort a dive than compromise safety protocols. His ex-wife knew him as someone who applied the same rigid standards to family life, which explained why he was divorced and living alone in a small apartment in Honolulu, seeing his 11-year-old twin daughters every other weekend. The detail that humanized him beyond his professional credentials was what he did on Saturdays. He taught technical diving to veterans dealing with PTSD, offering them the same underwater silence that had helped him process his own years in service. The reason Devon was 187 nautical miles southwest of Guam on that October morning came down to a contract worth $180,000. Oceanic Mineral Ventures, a Chinese-American joint venture specializing in rare earth element extraction, had hired him for a 3-week preliminary survey of geological formations in an area where sonar had detected unusual mineral deposits. The job required exactly the kind of deep technical diving that separated contractors like Devon from recreational divers. He'd be operating between 300 and 400 meters, using closed-circuit rebreather systems and custom trimix blends that allowed for extended bottom time at depths where most people would lose consciousness within minutes. His surface support that morning was Garrett Kim, a 34-year-old dive tender and ROV technician who'd worked with Devon on 6 previous contracts. They had a rhythm. Garrett managed topside logistics, while Devon handled the underwater survey work. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, calm seas, surface temperature at 26 degrees Celsius. At 365 meters, the water temperature would drop to 2 degrees Celsius. Devon's dry suit, a 7mm custom thermal model, would handle it. His gas mix, Trimix 1050, consisted of 10% oxygen, 50% helium, and 40% nitrogen. Everything was calculated, everything was controlled. And at 6:34 that morning, when Devon began his descent into water so deep that sunlight hadn't reached the bottom in millions of years, neither he nor Garrett had any reason to expect that the mineral anomaly their sonar had detected 400 meters north of their planned survey point would turn out to be something alive. The descent protocol was standard for this type of survey work. Devon clipped his umbilical communications line to the weighted descent cable at 6:34 in the morning, checked his rebreather's oxygen partial pressure one final time, and began dropping into water that shifted from turquoise to deep blue to black within the first 60 feet. His dive computer, mounted on his left wrist, tracked his depth in real time, while his helmet-mounted camera recorded everything his headlamp illuminated. The communication line allowed him to maintain voice contact with Garrett on the surface vessel, a critical safety measure when working at depths where equipment failure could mean death within minutes. At 100 feet, Devon could still see the hull of the boat above him, a dark shape against the lighter surface. At 200 feet, that reference point disappeared entirely, and he was suspended in a void with only the thin cable connecting him to the world above. His breathing was controlled, mechanical, each inhalation and exhalation processed through the rebreather's scrubber system that removed carbon dioxide and recycled his breathing gas. The helium in his trimix made his voice sound distorted when he spoke, but Garrett had worked with him long enough to understand the compressed speech patterns. Passing 200 meters, Devon reported at 6:41, and Garrett's response crackled back through the helmet speaker, confirming depth and vitals looked normal. The survey plan called for Devon to reach 350 meters, conduct a visual inspection of the geological formations that sonar had identified as potentially mineral-rich, collect water samples at depth, and then begin his ascent. The entire bottom time would be approximately 30 minutes, followed by the mandatory decompression stops that would turn a 350-meter dive into a 4-plus-hour commitment. This was technical diving at its most demanding, the kind of work that required absolute focus and zero margin for error. At 300 meters, Devon's headlamp beam revealed nothing but particles suspended in the water column, organic matter drifting in currents too subtle to feel but powerful enough to move tons of water across miles of ocean floor. His depth gauge read 320 meters when he noticed the first anomaly, a faint glow in the distance, perhaps 400 meters to the north of his planned survey coordinates. Bioluminescence wasn't unusual at these depths. Deep-sea organisms generated their own light for hunting, mating, and communication. But this glow had a quality that caught his attention because it didn't behave like the sporadic flashes he'd seen on hundreds of previous deep dives. It pulsed with regularity, a rhythm that seemed almost deliberate, cycling between blue and violet in a pattern that repeated every 7 to 8 seconds. Devon made a decision that would change everything that followed. He unclipped from the weighted descent line and used his fins to propel himself toward the light source, trailing his umbilical communications cable behind him. "Garrett, I've got bioluminescence at bearing 340 degrees, moving to investigate," he transmitted, and Garrett's response was immediate. "Copy that. You've got about 200 meters of slack on the comm line. Watch your distance." 30. At 365 meters, Devon's headlamp illuminated what his sonar couldn't have prepared him for. The organism was massive, serpentine in form, stretching approximately 47 meters from what appeared to be its anterior end to its posterior terminus. Its body diameter measured roughly 3.2 meters at the widest section, tapering gradually toward both ends. But size alone wasn't what made Devon's breathing pattern change, wasn't what triggered the involuntary physiological response that would show up clearly on his body camera footage. The creature's skin was translucent, revealing an internal circulatory system that glowed with that same blue-violet bioluminescence he'd seen from a distance, pulsing in waves that traveled along its length, like a heartbeat made visible. It possessed 6 appendages arranged in symmetrical pairs along its body, each terminating in structures that resembled vestigial hands, complete with what looked like digit-like projections that flexed and extended with apparent purpose. The head, if it could be called that, featured 3 dark cavities where eyes might have been on any conventional organism, but these weren't eyes in any biological sense Devon recognized. They were empty sockets, yet the creature oriented itself toward him with unmistakable awareness, tracking his position as he hovered in the water column, his fins moving in small corrections to maintain depth. The bioluminescent patterns on the creature's skin weren't random. Devon watched geometric symbols form and dissolve across its translucent surface, shapes that resembled mathematical notations or linguistic characters, cycling through configurations that seemed to follow an internal logic he couldn't parse. The creature moved against the current without any visible effort, defying the fluid dynamics that governed every other organism Devon had ever observed underwater. It didn't undulate its body like an eel or pump water through a jet propulsion system like a squid. It simply moved, as if the ocean's pressure and current were suggestions it chose to ignore. And then, at 6:52 in the morning, something happened inside Devon's helmet that he would later struggle to explain to investigators, psychologists, and the handful of people who'd believe his account. Tears began streaming down his face, involuntary and uncontrollable, a physiological response to fear so profound that his autonomic nervous system bypassed his conscious mind entirely. The emotion wasn't panic or surprise, it was existential terror, the kind that comes from recognizing something that shouldn't exist according to every framework humans use to understand reality. His communication line went dead at that exact moment, the umbilical cable going slack in the water as if something had severed it cleanly 300 meters above his position. The loss of communication triggered Devon's training immediately. Without the umbilical line connecting him to surface support, he was operating on his own gas supply and navigation, which meant following the emergency ascent protocol he'd drilled hundreds of times but had never needed to execute at this depth. He took one final look at the creature, which remained motionless in the water approximately 15 meters away, its bioluminescent patterns still cycling through those geometric configurations, and then he began his controlled ascent. The dive computer on his wrist calculated his decompression obligation in real time. 4 hours and 18 minutes of staged stops at progressively shallower depths, allowing the helium and nitrogen dissolved in his tissues to off-gas slowly enough to avoid fatal bubble formation in his bloodstream. He couldn't rush this process. At 365 meters, the pressure was crushing, nearly 12 times what his body experienced at the surface, and ascending too quickly would kill him more surely than any creature in the ocean. His breathing remained controlled as he rose through the black water, checking his depth gauge every 30 seconds, maintaining the precise ascent rate of 10 meters per minute that his training demanded. During the decompression stops, something extraordinary happened that Devon would only realize later when reviewing his helmet camera footage. The creature followed him. Not aggressively, not with any apparent predatory intent, but with that same eerie motionlessness he'd observed at depth. At 180 meters, where Devon hung on a decompression trapeze he'd deployed from his equipment, the creature hovered in the water column below him, maintaining exactly the same depth, simply existing in that impossible way that defied every principle of marine locomotion. Devon could see it clearly in the blue-green light that filtered down from the surface, close enough now that sunlight penetrated the depths. He tried signaling Garrett with his backup slate, writing out shorthand notes about the creature's position, but when he finally made voice contact through his backup emergency radio at 90 meters, Garrett's response was immediate and confusing. "Devon, there's nothing on sonar. I'm tracking your ascent, but there's no biological signature below you. Are you experiencing narcosis?" Devon looked down at the creature, which was still there, still hovering, still cycling through those bioluminescent patterns, and he understood with absolute certainty that whatever he was seeing either couldn't be detected by conventional sonar or was somehow rendering itself invisible to electronic sensing equipment. He surfaced at 11:05 in the morning, 4 hours and 33 minutes after his initial descent, emerging into bright tropical sunlight that felt alien after the absolute darkness of the deep. Garrett was waiting with the dive ladder, helping him onto the boat deck with practiced efficiency, already running through the post-dive checklist before Devon had even removed his helmet. "Your comm line got severed clean at about 300 meters, Garrett said, examining the frayed end of the umbilical cable. "Looks like it got caught on something sharp, maybe a rock outcropping." But Devon had been in open water, nowhere near any geological formations, and the cut was too precise, too surgical to be caused by accidental contact. His body camera had captured 23 minutes of footage showing the creature in detail from multiple angles, including several close-up sequences where those geometric patterns on its skin were clearly visible. His dive computer had logged every second of the encounter, recording his depth, gas consumption, heart rate, and the exact timestamp when his communication system failed. This wasn't a hallucination or nitrogen narcosis or some trick of light and shadow in the deep. This was documented, recorded, and absolutely real. At 11:47 that morning, 42 minutes after Devon surfaced, a Navy Seahawk helicopter appeared on the horizon and landed on their vessel's helipad without requesting permission or transmitting any advance notice. Commander Hayes, who introduced himself as representing the United States Navy Deep Submergence Unit, stepped onto the deck with 3 other personnel and immediately began confiscating equipment. He took Devon's body camera, his dive computer, his backup electronics, and the water samples Devon had collected at depth. The explanation Hayes provided was bureaucratic and transparently weak. "We're conducting scheduled military exercises in this region. Your vessel is operating within a restricted zone. We need to verify your equipment isn't interfering with sensitive naval operations." When Devon pointed out that no restricted zone had been marked on any maritime navigation charts and that his company had filed all proper permits with both American and Guamanian authorities, Hayes simply repeated his statement about military exercises and handed both Devon and Garrett non-disclosure agreements that threatened federal prosecution if they discussed anything they'd observed during the dive. The NDAs were pre-printed, professionally formatted documents that looked like they'd been prepared weeks in advance, not improvised in response to an unexpected situation. The money appeared in Devon's bank account 6 hours later. $180,000, the exact amount specified in his contract with Oceanic Mineral Ventures, transferred with a speed that suggested the payment had been authorized before he'd even completed his post-dive debriefing. Contracts of this size typically required 2 to 3 weeks of processing, invoicing, and corporate approval chains. This transfer had happened faster than most people could wire money to a family member. Devon stared at the notification on his phone and understood with perfect clarity that he'd been paid to disappear, to accept the money and walk away from whatever he'd found at 365 meters. But before Commander Hayes had confiscated his equipment, Devon had done something that his years in the Navy had taught him. He'd created a backup. The body camera footage had been transmitting to an encrypted cloud storage system that ran parallel to the camera's internal memory, a redundancy protocol that technical divers used in case equipment was lost or damaged during recovery operations. Hayes had taken the camera, but he hadn't known to ask about remote backups. And that footage, all 23 minutes of impossible biology hovering in the darkness, was still accessible from any device with an internet connection and the right decryption key. Devon spent the next 3 weeks doing what any technical professional would do when confronted with data that contradicted official explanations. He researched. He started with technical diving forums, searching for any mention of unusual encounters at extreme depths in the Western Pacific. What he found were fragments, anecdotal reports that had been dismissed as narcosis-induced hallucinations or outright fabrications. A commercial diver in 1987 reported seeing a massive bioluminescent serpent at 412 meters off the coast of Palau. An oceanographic research team in 2004 documented unidentified large-scale biological movement on sonar during a survey dive near the Mariana Trench, but their findings were never published in peer-reviewed literature. A Navy submariner, posting anonymously on a deep-sea exploration forum in 2019, described observing something alive and huge through a periscope at a depth where conventional marine biology suggested nothing that large should exist. Each account had been individually dismissed, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. These weren't random sightings scattered across decades. They were concentrated in a specific geographic region, all occurring at depths below 300 meters, and all describing similar characteristics: extreme length, bioluminescence, and movement that defied standard marine locomotion. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. On November 8th, 3 weeks after his encounter, Devon received an encrypted email from someone identifying themselves only as Dr. Rachel Soto, marine biologist with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. The message was brief. "You saw something on October 14th that you weren't supposed to see. I work with data that I'm not supposed to access. We should talk, but not through normal channels." They arranged a voice call using a secure application that Rachel specified, and when they finally spoke, her first question wasn't about the creature itself, but about Devon's emotional response during the encounter. "Did you experience unexplained fear?" she asked. Not the normal kind of fear you'd feel seeing something unexpected, but terror that felt like it came from outside your own mind? Devon confirmed that was exactly what he'd experienced, those involuntary tears streaming down his face inside his helmet, and Rachel's response carried the weight of someone who'd been waiting years to have this conversation with someone who'd actually been there. "It's infrasound," she said. 7 hertz, below the threshold of human hearing but perfectly capable of triggering fear responses in mammalian nervous systems. The creature emits it as a defensive mechanism, probably to discourage potential threats, without engaging in direct confrontation. Your body was reacting to something your conscious mind couldn't even perceive. What Rachel sent him next was a collection of documents that shouldn't exist outside of classified government servers. Project Abyssal Witness, initiated in 1968 by a joint Navy and NOAA task force, had been tracking this exact organism for 56 years. The file contained 14 documented sightings between 1968 and 2023, each recorded with precise coordinates, depth measurements, and observational data. But the truly significant detail wasn't the creature itself. It was the timing. Every single sighting occurred between 8 and 14 days before a major seismic event. a submarine earthquake registering 8.0 or higher on the Richter scale. The creature had appeared 11 days before the Tohoku earthquake in 2011, the 9.1 magnitude event that triggered the devastating tsunami in Japan. It had been observed 8 days before the 7.7 magnitude Mariana earthquake in 2016. The pattern was absolute and terrifying in its consistency. Devon's sighting on October 14th meant that somewhere in the western Pacific, a massive seismic event was building beneath the ocean floor, and this creature, whatever it was, could detect the tectonic stress weeks before human instruments registered any anomalies. The classified documents revealed something else that changed Devon's understanding of his encounter entirely. The creature wasn't unknown to the Navy. It wasn't a new discovery that had triggered an emergency response. They'd been monitoring it for more than half a century, tracking its appearances, studying its behavior, and trying unsuccessfully to capture or contain it for research purposes. The Leviathan Response Protocol, established in 1972, was a standing order that required immediate naval deployment whenever certain acoustic signatures were detected at specific depths in the Pacific. That explained how Commander Hayes had arrived so quickly after Devon surfaced. The Navy hadn't responded to Devon's discovery. They'd responded to the creature's presence, which their underwater acoustic monitoring systems had detected the moment it began emitting those infrasound pulses. Devon had simply been in the wrong place at exactly the wrong time, witnessing something that the United States military had spent decades trying to keep secret. Not because the creature itself posed a threat to national security, but because of what its appearances predicted. If the public knew that a massive organism was appearing off the coast of Guam 2 weeks before a major earthquake, the panic and evacuation would be catastrophic. And if that earthquake never came, or came but was smaller than predicted, the credibility of every government scientific agency would be destroyed. So they'd chosen secrecy, paying off witnesses, confiscating evidence, and maintaining the fiction that these sightings were either fabrications or misidentifications of known species. Rachel explained the rest through a series of encrypted messages over the following days. The geometric symbols Devon had observed on the creature's bioluminescent skin weren't random patterns. They were communication, though whether the creature was trying to communicate with other members of its species or with human observers remained unclear. The Navy had employed linguists, mathematicians, and cryptographers to analyze the patterns since 1987, when they'd first obtained clear footage of the symbols. No one had successfully decoded them. The current working theory, Rachel said, suggested the creature wasn't predatory and wasn't hostile. It was a sentinel species, something that had evolved or adapted to detect changes in tectonic stress that human technology couldn't measure until it was too late. Whether the species was trying to warn surface life about impending disasters or simply responding to environmental stimuli for its own purposes, no one knew. What the Navy did know was that every attempt to capture or contain a specimen had failed. The creatures were too fast, too aware, and too capable of evading any trap or net that had been deployed. And there were more than one. The documents suggested a population, not a single individual, though estimates of population size ranged from as few as 5 to as many as 30 individuals distributed across the Pacific. The consequences for everyone involved unfolded with bureaucratic precision over the following months. Devon's commercial diving license was suspended in December of 2023 for what the regulatory board termed violations of established safety protocols, specifically his decision to deviate from his planned survey coordinates to investigate an unidentified light source. The suspension was technically temporary, pending a review that never seemed to get scheduled, but the practical effect was permanent. No commercial diving operation would hire a contractor whose credentials were under investigation. Garrett Kim found his contract with Oceanic Mineral Ventures terminated 3 weeks after the incident, and within a month, he'd been reassigned to terrestrial logistics work at a shipping facility in Long Beach, California, far from any ocean deeper than a harbor channel. Dr. Rachel Soto, the NOAA marine biologist who'd risked her career to share classified information with Devon, was officially reassigned to Arctic research priorities in February of 2024, which meant she was currently stationed at a remote research facility in Utqiagvik, Alaska, studying ice core samples and marine life in conditions about as far from the tropical Pacific as it was possible to get, while remaining in American territory. None of these consequences were officially connected to the October 14th encounter, but the timing and coordination suggested a systematic effort to isolate everyone who'd had direct contact with the creature, or access to documentation about its existence. The backup footage that Devon had preserved in encrypted cloud storage didn't remain secret for long. In late October of 2023, someone uploaded the full 23-minute video to a technical diving forum frequented by commercial divers and deep-sea exploration enthusiasts. Devon never confirmed whether he was the source of the leak, but the video spread rapidly, downloaded by approximately 4,700 people before it was removed from the forum's servers 6 hours after the initial upload. The removals were thorough and coordinated, affecting not just the original forum post, but also mirror sites and social media platforms where users had attempted to share the footage. But 4,700 downloads meant 4,700 potential copies floating around hard drives and backup systems across the world. And within weeks, other witnesses began coming forward. Owen Fletcher, a petroleum industry diver who'd worked in the region in 2019, contacted Devon directly and described seeing an identical organism at 340 meters during a pipeline inspection dive. An anonymous post from someone claiming to be a retired Navy submariner described observing something massive and bioluminescent through periscope equipment in 1998 at depths classified beyond normal operational parameters. A local fisherman from Guam shared photographs of unusual bioluminescent patterns he'd observed from his boat in 2022, taken at night approximately 40 miles southwest of the main island, though the photographs were too distant and low resolution to show the creature's physical structure in detail. On October 27th of 2023, exactly 13 days after Devon's encounter with the creature, a 7.9 magnitude earthquake struck approximately 90 miles east of the Philippine coast, triggering tsunami warnings across the western Pacific and causing measurable seismic activity as far north as Taiwan and as far south as Indonesia. The timing confirmed everything that Rachel's leaked documents had suggested. The creature appeared 10 to 14 days before major submarine seismic events, its presence serving as a biological early warning system that was more accurate than any human technology currently deployed in the region. The Philippine earthquake resulted in significant coastal damage and 17 confirmed fatalities, numbers that would have been catastrophically higher without the tsunami warning systems that gave coastal populations approximately 40 minutes of evacuation time. But 40 minutes wasn't 2 weeks. If authorities had known about the creature's appearance on October 14th, if they'd taken the pattern seriously and issued advance warnings, those 17 deaths might have been preventable. Instead, the information remained classified, accessible only to military and intelligence personnel who'd apparently decided that public panic was a greater risk than public safety. The Navy's response to the confirmed pattern was to increase their presence in the region. Remote-operated vehicles were deployed permanently at key coordinates throughout the Western Pacific, monitoring for acoustic signatures and visual confirmation of the creature's appearances. The area where Devon had conducted his dive, was officially redesignated as a marine sanctuary in January of 2024, which effectively prohibited all commercial fishing, recreational diving, and unauthorized vessel transit within a 15 nautical mile radius. The official justification cited protection of sensitive coral reef ecosystems and endangered marine species, but anyone familiar with the region's actual marine biology knew that the stated reasons didn't match the environmental conditions at those coordinates. In March of 2024, another sighting occurred 230 miles south of Devon's original encounter location, this time at a depth of 1,089 feet, observed by a scientific research vessel conducting unrelated oceanographic surveys. The footage from that encounter was never made public, but according to sources within the research community, it showed a creature matching the exact physical description that Devon had documented 6 months earlier. What we know now, based on the accumulated evidence from decades of suppressed sightings and the more recent leaks of classified documentation, is that these creatures exist, that the United States Navy has been aware of them since at least 1968, and that their appearances correlate with seismic activity with an accuracy that exceeds any technological prediction system currently available to science. What we don't know is far more troubling. The geometric symbols that pulse across the creature's bioluminescent skin have never been successfully decoded, despite 50-plus years of analysis by government linguists and cryptographers. We don't know if the symbols represent language, mathematics, or something else entirely. We don't know why the creatures choose to show themselves to specific civilian observers while remaining undetectable to others in the same location. Devon saw the creature clearly for 23 minutes, while Garrett, monitoring from the surface with professional-grade sonar equipment, detected nothing. We don't know how many of these organisms exist in the Pacific, or whether similar species inhabit other ocean basins where deep-sea monitoring is less comprehensive. We don't know where they go between sightings or what depths they normally inhabit when they're not appearing in the weeks before earthquakes. And most critically, we don't know if these creatures are simply responding to tectonic stress that they can sense through biological mechanisms we don't understand, or if their presence somehow influences the seismic events themselves. The question that keeps researchers and conspiracy theorists arguing in online forums and academic conferences is deceptively simple, but profound in its implications. If the creature predicts earthquakes, does it cause them, or is it trying to warn us? The distinction matters enormously. If these organisms are passive observers of geological processes, then they represent an unprecedented opportunity for early warning systems that could save thousands of lives. If they're active participants in triggering seismic events, then their appearances represent a threat that no military or scientific organization is currently equipped to address. The evidence suggests the former, but the complete lack of understanding about the creature's biology, behavior, and origins means we can't rule out possibilities that seem absurd by conventional scientific standards. In November of 2024, Devon received an anonymous offer through an encrypted email account, $500,000 to return to the original dive site with privately funded equipment and attempt to make contact with the creature again, this time with recording equipment that couldn't be confiscated by military authorities. The message included detailed specifications for the dive equipment that would be provided, a timeline for the operation, and assurances of legal protection through undisclosed channels. Devon never responded to the offer publicly, and in subsequent conversations with the few journalists who managed to contact him, he insisted that he had no plans to return to deep-sea diving after losing his commercial license. But his dive computer, the backup unit that the Navy hadn't confiscated during Commander Hayes's visit because it was in his apartment in Honolulu rather than on the boat, tells a different story. The device logged a dive profile on March 8th of 2024. descent to 368 meters at coordinates that match the original October encounter location within a margin of less than 1 nautical mile. The dive lasted 6 hours and 11 minutes from initial descent to final surfacing, which suggests he completed full decompression protocols and spent significant time at depth. There's no official record of this dive, no filed permits, no surface support vessel registration, nothing in any database that would indicate Devon was anywhere near the Mariana Trench region on that date. And when asked directly about what he found during that unregistered solo dive to nearly the exact spot where he'd encountered something that violated every principle of marine biology he'd spent 20 years learning, Devon's response was always the same. "I went diving off the Honolulu coast that day. Just a shallow recreational dive to clear my head. Nothing worth talking about." But his dive computer doesn't lie, and the data it recorded shows something that raises more questions than it answers. Whatever Devon saw during those 6 hours at 368 meters, whatever made him risk his career and potentially his life to return to that location without authorization or backup, he's chosen to keep it to himself. And that silence, perhaps, is the most unsettling detail of this entire story.